Thank you very much, first of all. Thank you for your invitation. And it's a very good opportunity to talk about democracy here in Athens, as always. In fact, it was 1.5 years ago, if I remember well, when I was a guest of the Athens Democracy Forum, and I spoke at this very place about the need to defend the values of liberal democracy, the values which constitute the foundations of liberal democracy, which is perhaps, it's at least my belief, the most important invention of Europeans. I used a quote then from the Peloponnesian War about the situation in Corcyra, because I was struck by the similarity of the past and present situation in politics, as well as by the repetitiveness of certain mechanisms in the history of our civilization. As you know, Thucydides wrote about disorder resulting from some internal conflicts, political passions, and constant escalations of struggles. And this disorder, because of this disorder, any kind of agreement was not possible. And the creators of this chaos arbitrarily changed the meaning of, in fact, every word, every term. And also values were being reversed, the most fundamental values for the democratic polis. I also wanted to use then a quote describing Athens in time of plague, but it seems to me too detached from contemporary reality. You know, after all, plagues belong to a remote past. This was what I thought then. And also because Pericles, the founder of democracy, died in the plague, I decided that it was perhaps too gloomy to mention it during my then visit to Athens. And you know, it was only 18 months ago. And the 18 months that shook the world, during which history rapidly accelerated. The pandemic turned everything upside down. Our world and our habits, our daily life, but it did not invalidate the question about the future of democracy. Quite the opposite. It only made it even more relevant and more urgent, as it also made us aware of the scale of threat. Not only health and economy-related threats, but also of those of strictly political nature. And coming back to Thucydides, I have noticed how dangerous this phenomenon of reversing meanings of, and values is, how devastating it can be, and dangerous. How dangerous a lie can be. A lie and hypocrisy, the younger sister of lie. For the public order, also for the freedom for individuals. This is why the first necessity in the European discourse about democracy is to call all things by their real name. The question about red lines in our fight to save democracy in Europe seems of secondary importance to me, especially that politicians have always had this remarkable skill to constantly move the red lines depending on their interest. You know it, I know it, maybe I am an expert here. In theory, red lines are very clearly drawn in our treaties, for example. And they are the rule of law, the freedom of speech, the minorities' rights, etc., etc. But in practice, and I know what I am talking about, they are most often only empty declarations. Because what is lacking today, not only in Europe, is this determination, courage, and the consistency to respect those rules, to enforce them, to stick to them. Today, and I think not only for me, the highest priority is to turn those declarations into a commitment. Commitment which is seriously treated. What does it mean in practice? First, in a geopolitical dimension, Europe cannot give in to a temptation of creeping capitulation against the external forces which attack and undermine our foundations. A tough stance and readiness to react to the aggressive attempts coming from such authoritarian powers like China or Russia are a conditio sine qua non for the survival of the Western civilization, political civilization based on freedom. We do not have today, as we won't have in the future, any relevant influence on the internal politics of Russia or in China. I am not naive to believe that we have a real power to interfere, but we must be able to defend our internal policy against any interference, increasingly more brutal and aggressive, coming from their side. Our resistance against ideological, economic and technological offensive of the authoritarian powers is also a way to define ourselves. Yeah, this is maybe the most important thing today to understand, that our resistance can be our self-definition. We are not able to turn Mr. Putin or President Xi into Democrats, but at least let us not allow them to turn us into pseudo-democrats and change our way of thinking or our European way of life. We must therefore draw the lines and barriers protecting us from the anti-liberal sabotage. That is why it is so crucial for Europe to be unambiguously positive in its reaction towards the initiative, the new initiative coming from Washington after the election, after Joe Biden's victory, and the attempt to renew our alliance, transatlantic alliance for freedom, law, and democracy. And Biden's communication is quite clear here. It would be really bad if this today, fashionable idea of the strategic European autonomy transformed into an idea of an equal distance of Europe towards China and USA, or towards Russia and the United States. Such a symmetry in our international relations would be a great mistake, with fatal long-term consequences. And short-term interests like, Nord Stream 2 or Chinese investments, etc., cannot outweigh the strategic goal, which is the protection of our foundations. Second, with equal determination, we should engage in confrontation with anti-liberal forces inside Europe. Those who flirt also with the Beijing or Kremlin, and it is not a coincidence. Today, as the European Union, we are ready to invest enormous financial resources in the recovery and transformation of our economies after the pandemic, as well as in the protection of our environment and climate. And it is high time to understand that democratic values are also our natural environment, are our climate, and that they also need our support, especially today, as they are in a state of emergency too. Our common European funds must not serve, under any circumstances, those who are busy building the European variants or mutations of corrupted authoritarianisms. The financing of those deconstructed democracies would be a huge mistake. A great EU debate on the future of Europe is just starting, and one of its objectives must be a creation of mechanisms of support, financial, political, institutional, educational support for the European model of democracy founded on freedom. And third, to me, more important than a theoretical discussion about procedural red lines, would be mobilization, a calling to arms of all those who are ready and willing to defend this liberal minimum, this basic set of values, which is defined, clear, and obvious. What is not obvious and clear is whether we are ready to defend them. In some sense, each and every one of us must understand how serious the situation is and find in ourselves, inside our souls, these thin lines between pragmatism and cynicism, the thin lines between flexibility and submission, between cooperation and appeasement, and the thin line between cautiousness and cowardice. If you repeat over and over that freedom and truth is so important and so essential to us, then we must also learn again to fight for them. Because as Pericles said, and I think today I can quote him, freedom is the sure possession of those alone who have the courage to defend it.
Thank you, President Tusk. Thank you very much.